Parents favored my twin sister so much that they blew my wedding fund on her, so I cut them off after rejecting Mom's selfish demand. Growing up as a twin, people always assume that the bond between us is unbreakable, a perfect mirror of love and understanding. But with my twin sister Laura, things were different. She was always the star, pretty, charming, and effortlessly likable. Teachers adored her, friends flocked to her, and our parents, well, they worshipped her. I was the quieter twin, the one who worked hard to get good grades and didn't crave the spotlight. Yet, no matter how much I achieved, I was always overshadowed by Laura's effortless grace. Family conversations revolved around her if she wanted something. It was given, while my requests were often forgotten. Our childhood was filled with little moments that made it clear where I stood. Birthdays, for instance, were joint affairs, but the cakes were always what Laura liked, chocolate with strawberries, which I hated. Gifts would somehow align with her interests more than mine. I learned early to swallow disappointment, convincing myself it didn't matter. But the sting never truly faded. I spent most of my teenage years yearning for the kind of attention she received without asking. I wanted to believe it wasn't intentional, that maybe they didn't realize what they were doing. It wasn't until high school that I realized the depth of the favoritism. My parents openly funded Laura's extracurricular activities, expensive dance classes, summer camps, and the latest fashion trends. I had to beg for things like a used laptop for schoolwork, or even a new set of paints for my art class. I was the afterthought. Yet I kept silent, hoping that one day I'd be enough in their eyes. That hope was the thread I clung to, but I didn't know how thin it really was. When we turned 16, my parents made us both a promise. They'd started a wedding fund for each of us, meant to help with the big day when it eventually came. "You'll both have beautiful weddings," Mom said, her eyes brimming with excitement. At the time, it felt like an acknowledgement that we were equals. For once, it wasn't just about Laura. The promise of that fund became a quiet comfort, a sign that my parents would be there for me too, when it mattered most. I dreamed of a small but elegant ceremony, nothing extravagant, just something where I could feel special for once. In the following years, I focused on my studies and career, while Laura's life took a different path. She dropped out of college, dated a string of wealthy but unreliable boyfriends, and seemed to drift from one passion project to the next. Our parents never seemed worried. "She'll figure it out," Dad would say, always with a smile. Meanwhile, I worked tirelessly, building a steady career, finding love with my fiancé, Daniel, and carefully planning the life we wanted together. When Daniel proposed, it was the happiest moment of my life. We were both practical people, so we planned a modest wedding, knowing the fund my parents promised would help ease the financial burden. I called Mom to share the news, expecting joy and excitement. But her reaction was strangely muted, and that sinking feeling I'd grown familiar with returned. "We'll talk soon," she said, her voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't congratulations, it was hesitation. A few days after the engagement, my parents invited me over for dinner. Daniel couldn't join, so I went alone, eager to talk about wedding plans and the future. The evening started normally, with small talk and Laura's latest adventure dominating the conversation. But as we finished dessert, my mother's face turned serious. "There's something we need to tell you," she began, glancing nervously at my father. My stomach twisted in anticipation. I knew that tone, it was the prelude to bad news. "We used your wedding fund," she finally admitted. "Laura needed help with some things, medical bills. A down payment on her apartment." The words hit me like a punch. I sat frozen, struggling to process what she'd just said. "You used the fund?" I asked, my voice cracking. "The one you promised me," Mom nodded, looking genuinely apologetic. But there was no remorse deep enough to soften the blow. "We thought you'd understand," she continued. "You're so responsible. And Laura. She needed us." I felt anger bubbling under my skin, a lifetime of being second best surging to the surface. "You didn't even ask me," I whispered, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You promised me that money, and you gave it away like it meant nothing." Dad tried to justify it, talking about family obligations and how they'd help me later, but I couldn't hear it. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about every time they had chosen her over me. Every sacrifice I made, every moment I stayed quiet, came crashing down in that instant. I left their house that night with one decision burning in my mind: I was done being their afterthought. I didn't sleep that night. My mind churned with memories, conversations, and regrets. By morning, I knew I had to confront Laura. I wasn't sure if she even knew about the wedding fund, but I needed to hear it from her. I called and asked to meet. She sounded surprised but agreed, telling me to come by her new apartment, the one my wedding fund had helped secure. Laura greeted me with her usual effortless smile, the kind that had always made everyone melt. She seemed genuinely happy to see me, but I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. Did you know, I asked bluntly, the moment we sat down. Her face twisted in confusion. Know what? I took a deep breath, trying to control the storm inside me. That Mom and Dad used my wedding fund to help you with this place and whatever else. For a second, her expression faltered, guilt flickering in her eyes. I didn't know it was your wedding fund specifically, she admitted, looking away. But I knew they were helping me. Her admission stung. But what hurt more was the lack of remorse. And you didn't think to question it? I asked, voice trembling with anger. You just took it, like everything else. Laura crossed her arms defensively. I needed it, she said sharply. Do you think I enjoyed asking for help? Life hasn't been easy for me either, I laughed bitterly. You've always needed Laura. And they've always given. But this time they stole from me to do it. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze, and for the first time I realized she wasn't the golden child anymore. She was just as lost as I'd always feared, and I was done paying the price. After the confrontation with Laura, I made the hardest decision I'd ever faced. I called my parents and told them I needed space. They didn't understand at first, pleading with me to reconsider. We're family, Mom kept saying. Families help each other, but I had finally learned that sometimes, families can hurt you more than anyone else. Helping Laura didn't have to come at my expense, I replied coldly. You broke a promise, and you broke my trust. I explained that I wouldn't be speaking to them for a while and that I didn't want them at my wedding. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. You can't be serious, Dad finally said. This is childish, but it wasn't childish, it was the only way I could protect myself. I'm done being second best, I said firmly. If you can't see how much you've hurt me, then we have nothing to talk about. I hung up, shaking with a mixture of sadness and relief. For the first time in my life I was putting myself first. The guilt tried to creep in, but I pushed it away. I wasn't cutting them off because I wanted to hurt them. I was cutting them off because I needed to heal. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into wedding planning with Daniel. We tightened the budget, made compromises, and focused on what truly mattered: celebrating our love. Daniel was my rock, never once questioning my decision to distance myself from my family. You're doing what you need to do, he reassured me. This is your time. His support meant everything. It reminded me that family isn't always the one you're born into, it's the one you choose. I reached out to friends, reconnecting with people who had always been there but whom I'd neglected in my quest for parental approval. My best friend Megan stepped in as my unofficial wedding planner, determined to make the day special despite our limited resources. We'll make it beautiful, she promised, her eyes sparkling with determination. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. As the wedding date approached, I felt lighter. The weight of my parents' expectations and Laura's shadow no longer loomed over me. I was building something new, something my own, surrounded by people who truly cared for me. I missed the idea of the family I wished I had, but I no longer mourned the reality. Instead, I embraced the future, ready to start a new chapter in my life, free from the past that had defined me for too long. Just as I was starting to find peace, my mother began a relentless guilt campaign. It started with daily voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. You're tearing this family apart, she would say, her voice cracking with emotion. We did what we thought was best. Don't let one mistake ruin everything. I deleted them at first, unwilling to let her words burrow into my mind. But the calls kept coming, turning into long text messages about forgiveness and family bonds. The sheer volume of it made it clear they weren't going to let me go without a fight. Then came the flying monkeys, as Megan called them, relatives who suddenly appeared out of nowhere to plead my parents' case. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years left a voicemail about how I was being cruel and selfish. A cousin chimed in on social media, posting vague messages about how family should come first, no matter what. It was exhausting, like trying to outrun a tidal wave of misplaced loyalty. The message was clear: I was supposed to forgive, forget, and move on. But I couldn't. Not this time. The betrayal was too deep, and their apologies weren't genuine. They were demands disguised as remorse. They weren't sorry for what they did, they were sorry for the consequences. I saw it clearly now. Every message they sent, every relative they recruited, only solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me back into submission. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going back. One afternoon, as I was finalizing wedding details with Daniel, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Laura standing there, looking unusually disheveled. Her normally polished appearance was gone, replaced by an air of anxiety and weariness. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to hear whatever she had to say. But curiosity and a lingering hope for closure made me step aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, the silence thick between us. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how much I was taking from you." I never thought. She trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked vulnerable, like the sister I'd always wished she could be. "I didn't know they used your fund until you told me. And when I did, I couldn't stop thinking about it." I wanted to believe her, but I'd been hurt too many times. "Why are you here, Laura?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. She flinched at my tone. "I'm here because I miss you," she said. "And because I don't want to be the reason you lose your family." The sincerity in her eyes gave me pause, but it didn't erase the past. "It's not just about the money," I said, my voice softening. "It's about everything. You've always been their favorite, and I was always the afterthought. This was just the final straw." Laura nodded, wiping her tears. "I know," she admitted. "And I've been selfish. I let them spoil me, and I took it for granted. But I don't want to lose you, and I'm willing to fix this." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the possibility of reconciliation. "I'll talk to Mom and Dad," she continued. "I'll make them understand what they did. And if they don't, I'll stand by you. You're my sister, and I don't want this to be the end." It was the apology I had always wanted, but hearing it now felt bittersweet. Part of me wanted to embrace her, to believe that things could change. But the other part, the part that had been hurt too many times, remained wary. "This isn't something you can fix with one conversation," I said carefully. "It'll take time. And I need to know that you're serious." Laura nodded again, determination shining through her tears. "I am," she promised. "I'll prove it." For the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. But I knew better than to trust too quickly. Laura had to earn back my trust, and so did my parents. Only time would tell if they could. Days passed, and I waited to see if Laura's promises were just empty words. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I didn't have to wait long. One evening, Mom called me again, but this time her tone was different, quieter, almost resigned. "Laura spoke to us," she said, her voice trembling. "She told us how much we hurt you." For a moment, I was stunned. Laura had actually followed through, confronting them on my behalf. "I don't want to argue," Mom continued, "but I want you to know we're sorry." There was a pause, as if she was waiting for me to fill the silence with forgiveness, but I didn't. Instead, I let her sit in the discomfort. "Sorry for what exactly?" I finally asked, testing the depth of her apology. "For breaking a promise? Or for favoring Laura my entire life?" The hesitation on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "Both," she admitted softly. "We've been unfair to you. I can see that now." It should have felt like victory, hearing her admit the truth, but it didn't. The wound was too fresh. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but it doesn't change everything overnight. I need time, and I need you to respect that." Mom sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. "We'll wait," she said quietly. "But please don't shut us out forever." I ended the call, unsure if I felt relief or exhaustion. Maybe it was both. That night, Daniel found me sitting on the couch, lost in thought. He sat beside me, taking my hand. "How do you feel?" he asked gently, always knowing when to give me space and when to step in. I shrugged, staring at the floor. "I don't know. Part of me is glad they finally admitted it. But another part is still so angry." He nodded, his thumb tracing soothing circles on the back of my hand. "It's okay to feel both," he said. "You don't have to forgive them right away, or ever, if you don't want to." His words lifted some of the weight off my shoulders. I had been so caught up in the idea of reconciliation, I forgot that forgiveness wasn't an obligation. "I just don't know what they expect," I confessed. "An apology doesn't erase years of being second best." Daniel leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. "They're trying, but that doesn't mean you have to rush to meet them halfway. You set the terms now. This is your time." I exhaled, feeling some of the tension ease. "Thank you," I whispered. "For always being on my side." Daniel smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Always," he said. "You've got a new family now, and we're not going anywhere." In that moment I realized that whatever happened with my parents, I wasn't alone. I had Daniel, our future together, and the people who truly cared. That was enough. With the wedding only a few months away, the question of whether to invite my parents loomed large. Megan, ever the practical best friend, voiced her opinion during a coffee date. "You don't owe them anything," she said firmly. "If they're not going to add joy to the day, why have them there?" I knew she was right. The idea of my parents being at the wedding, pretending everything was fine, made my stomach churn. but the thought of their absence left an ache I couldn't ignore. They admitted they were wrong, I said, stirring my coffee absently. Isn't that what I wanted? Megan snorted. Admitting it and making it right are two different things. Don't let guilt push you into doing something you'll regret. She had a point. The day was supposed to be about me and Daniel, not a family reconciliation drama. Maybe I should set conditions, I mused. Make it clear that they're welcome if they respect my boundaries. Megan nodded. That's fair. But make sure they know it's their last chance. No drama, no guilt trips. Just support or nothing. Her advice was blunt but exactly what I needed to hear. I decided I'd send an invitation with a letter explaining my terms. If they truly wanted to be part of my life, they'd respect it. If not, I'd move forward without them. The choice would be theirs, but for once the power was mine. Writing the letter to my parents was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I wanted to be firm but not cruel, honest without sounding bitter. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank page for what felt like hours before I finally began. Dear Mom and Dad, I've thought a lot about our relationship and what I need moving forward. I love you both, but the hurt I've carried can't be ignored anymore. Your favoritism toward Laura has left scars that I'm still healing from, and using my wedding fund to support her was a betrayal I'm still struggling to forgive. Daniel and I are getting married soon, and I'm writing to invite you both. But there are conditions. If you choose to come, I need you to respect my boundaries. No guilt trips, no drama, and no talk of the past unless I bring it up. This day is about me and Daniel, and I won't allow it to be overshadowed by old wounds. I'm offering you a chance to be part of this new chapter in my life, but if you can't meet these terms, then it's better for everyone if you don't come. I hope you'll respect my wishes. Love, your daughter. I read it over several times, wondering if it was too harsh or too soft. But in the end it felt right. I sealed the letter, attached the wedding invitation, and sent it off. Now all I could do was wait and hope they respected my wishes. Days turned into weeks and I heard nothing. No calls, no messages, not even a card. I wasn't sure if their silence was out of anger or contemplation, but it gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to reach out, to demand a response, but Daniel reminded me to stay patient. You set the terms, he said gently. Now they have to decide if they'll meet them. Megan checked in daily, her fiery loyalty unwavering. If they can't handle your terms, then good riddance, she said one afternoon. But I could see the concern behind her bravado. She knew how much I was hurting, even if I tried to hide it. They've never had to meet my terms before, I admitted quietly. They've always set the rules. Maybe they don't know how. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find a letter in the mail. The handwriting was my mother's. My hands trembled as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever lay inside. Dear, we've read your letter, and we're sorry it's come to this. You're right, we've made mistakes, and we've hurt you deeply. We want to be there for your wedding, not to bring drama, but to support you. We'll respect your boundaries, and we'll do better. Love, Mom and Dad. I sat down, the letter clutched in my hands. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. They were willing to try, and for now that was enough. The weeks leading up to the wedding were tense but hopeful. My parents reached out occasionally, careful to keep conversations light and focused on wedding plans. They were cautious, as if afraid to push me too far, and I appreciated their effort. Laura, true to her word, stayed out of it entirely. She seemed determined to give me space and let me heal. One afternoon, my mother called to ask about her role at the wedding. I don't want to overstep, she said carefully. But if there's anything you need from me, I'll be there. It was strange to hear her so hesitant, like she was finally acknowledging the damage she'd done. I appreciate that, I said, surprising myself with how genuine I sounded. Just be there. That's all I need. On the day of the wedding, as I stood in my dress, I felt the weight of everything, the pain, the growth, the love I had fought so hard to protect. My parents sat quietly in the front row during the ceremony, tears in their eyes but no demands on their faces. For the first time, they looked like guests at my wedding, not the center of my life. And for the first time, that felt right. The ceremony was perfect, simple, intimate, and full of love. As I walked down the aisle, Daniel waiting with that soft smile that always calmed me, I felt a wave of emotion. This was my day, the day I had dreamed of for so long, and I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared. I caught a glimpse of my parents in the front row, sitting quietly with tear-streaked faces. For once, they weren't commanding the spotlight, and it was strangely comforting. Daniel took my hands as I reached him, and everything else faded away. His vows were full of warmth and promises, a reminder that I was no longer alone. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled but remained steady. "You've shown me what love really is," I said. "And that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you, no matter what." Daniel squeezed my hands, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, and in that moment I felt complete. As we exchanged rings, a quiet peace settled over me. The weight of past wounds lifted, if only for the day. When the officiant declared us husband and wife, the applause was deafening, but all I heard was the soft whisper of Daniel's "I love you" as he kissed me. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The reception was lively, filled with laughter, dancing, and a warmth I hadn't expected. My parents approached cautiously after the first dance, waiting for my signal to join me. I nodded, allowing them into the circle I had carefully constructed around myself. "You look beautiful," Mom said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," I replied. The words simple but sincere. For once she didn't push for more, didn't try to fix everything in one conversation. Dad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "We meant what we said in the letter," he began. "We're trying to do better." His vulnerability surprised me, and though I wasn't ready to forgive completely, I appreciated the effort. "I know," I said softly. "It's going to take time." They nodded in unison, accepting the boundaries I had set. Laura stayed in the background, a quiet observer. When she finally approached, it was with hesitation. "Congratulations," she said, her voice tentative. "You deserve this." I studied her for a moment, searching for the hidden resentment I had always expected but didn't find. "Thank you," I said, and for the first time it felt genuine. Maybe we weren't fully healed, but we were no longer adversaries. That was enough for now. As the evening wore on, I found myself sitting with Daniel, watching the people I loved celebrate. My parents danced together, their smiles small but genuine. Laura chatted with Megan, the tension between them easing. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. "You okay?" Daniel asked, slipping his arm around me. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his presence. "Yeah," I said with a soft smile. "Better than okay." It wasn't the wedding I had originally imagined when I was younger, but it was everything I needed. I had learned that love doesn't always come wrapped in perfect packages. Sometimes it's messy, painful, and imperfect, but it's still love. My parents were trying, and so was Laura. That was more than I had ever expected, and for the first time I felt hopeful about our future. As the night wound down, Daniel and I prepared to leave, the crowd cheering as we made our exit. I glanced back one last time, seeing my parents watching with a mixture of pride and sadness. I gave them a small wave, a silent promise that this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, not just for me and Daniel, but for all of us. We still had a long way to go, but at least we were finally on the right path. Daniel and I left the reception to a shower of cheers and sparklers, stepping into a car decorated with the usual "just married" signs. As the city lights blurred past, I let out a long breath, finally allowing myself to relax. "We did it," I whispered, glancing at Daniel, who grinned back. "We did," he said, his hand firmly in mine. The weight of the past months lifted, leaving only the anticipation of our new life together. Our honeymoon destination was a secluded beach resort, far from the chaos we had left behind. The first morning we woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and the soft scent of salt in the air. I stood on the balcony, letting the sun warm my skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no calls, no demands, no expectations. It was just us. "This feels unreal," I said as Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind. "It is," he murmured. "And it's ours." We spent our days walking along the beach, laughing over shared memories and talking about the future. Each moment was a reminder that I had made the right choices. I had chosen love, peace, and happiness over resentment and obligation. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. On the third day of our honeymoon, I woke up to find a message from Laura on my phone. My stomach tightened as I debated whether to open it, unsure of what it might contain. Daniel noticed my hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to deal with it now," he reminded me. But curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. "Hey, I know you're on your honeymoon, but I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for letting Mom and Dad be there, and for not shutting me out completely. I know I've hurt you, but I'm really trying. I hope one day we can be sisters again, the way we should have been all along. Enjoy your time with Daniel. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Love, Laura." I reread the message several times, unsure how to feel. It was heartfelt, and it felt different from the apologies I had received before. There was no guilt, no expectation, just a quiet acknowledgement of the past and a hope for the future. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle. I nodded slowly. "I think so," I said. "She's trying. They all are, and for the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could try too." When we returned from our honeymoon, I felt renewed, ready to face whatever came next. The first call I made was to Laura. She answered quickly, surprise evident in her voice. "Hey," she said, almost hesitant. "Hey," I replied, unsure of where to start. "I got your message." "Thank you." There was a pause, then a soft exhale of relief on her end. "I wasn't sure if you'd respond," she admitted. "I wasn't sure either," I confessed. "But I think I'm ready to try." Slowly, the relief in her voice was palpable. "I'd like that," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't expect us to fix everything overnight. I just want to be better, for both of us." We talked for a while. Not about the past, but about lighter things: her work, my honeymoon, the little things sisters should share. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And that was enough for now. I was still learning how to navigate the tangled web of family and forgiveness, but I was finally doing it on my terms. Boundaries were being set, bridges were being built, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward, not just away from the pain, but towards something better. A few weeks after returning from the honeymoon, I was surprised by an unexpected knock at the door. Peeking through the window, I saw my parents standing there, looking nervous and unsure. Daniel glanced at me, concerned. "Do you want me to answer?" he asked gently. I shook my head, taking a deep breath. "No, I've got this," I said, feeling stronger than I had in years. When I opened the door, they both greeted me with tentative smiles. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by," Mom said, her voice hesitant. It wasn't like them to visit without calling, and I could tell they weren't sure how to proceed. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They looked relieved, as if they had expected me to slam the door in their faces. Daniel gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder before heading to the kitchen to give us space. We sat awkwardly in the living room, the silence heavy. Finally, Dad spoke. "We wanted to see how you're doing. And thank you again for letting us be part of the wedding," he said, his voice sincere but uncertain. Mom nodded, adding, "It meant more to us than you know." Their gratitude seemed genuine. But I was cautious. "I'm doing well," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "And you're welcome." The conversation stayed polite but distant until Mom sighed and broke the silence. "I know it's not enough to just say we're sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "We failed you, and we'll probably never fully make up for it." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But we want to try. If you'll let us." It was the most vulnerable I had ever seen her, and it caught me off guard. I leaned forward, the weight of years of pain pressing on my chest. "You hurt me," I said quietly. "For years I felt invisible compared to Laura. And when you took my wedding fund for her, it felt like the final betrayal." Dad's shoulders slumped and he nodded solemnly. "We know," he said. "And we'll carry that regret for the rest of our lives." The room was thick with emotion, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. But then I realized something: they were finally listening, really listening. "I'm not ready to forgive completely," I said, my voice steadier now, "but I'm willing to take small steps." Mom wiped her eyes and Dad gave a small, grateful nod. "We'll take whatever you're willing to give," he said softly. It wasn't a resolution, but it was the beginning of something new. After that visit, things changed, slowly but noticeably. My parents respected my boundaries, reaching out without pushing, and I found myself more willing to answer their calls. Laura and I continued to rebuild our relationship, and though it was still fragile, it felt real. One day she invited me to lunch, and I accepted without hesitation, a small but meaningful step. During that lunch, Laura surprised me with an idea. "I know it might be too soon," she began cautiously, "but what if we started a new tradition? Just us, something separate from Mom and Dad." I tilted my head, intrigued. "What kind of tradition?" I asked. She smiled, a little shy. "Maybe a sister's trip every year? Something small at first. We could pick a place, go somewhere peaceful." The idea warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. "I like that," I said, surprised at how easily the words came. "Let's do it." It felt like a step toward reclaiming the bond we should have always had. As we talked and planned, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act, it was a journey. And maybe, just maybe, we were finally on the right path. Months passed, and the weight of old wounds grew lighter. My parents continued to respect my boundaries, and Laura and I found a rhythm in our new relationship. The first sisters' trip took us to a quiet coastal town, where we spent hours walking along the beach, talking about everything and nothing. It was peaceful, simple, and healing. Back home, Daniel and I settled into married life, stronger than ever. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I'd come. "I never thought I'd be here," I said, leaning into him. "I thought the pain would always be with me." Daniel kissed the top of my head. "You've grown so much," he said. "And you've created your own happiness, despite everything." He was right. The scars of the past would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I had found peace not in forgetting but in moving forward, surrounded by the love I had chosen and the family I had rebuilt. And for the first time I felt truly free, ready to embrace whatever the future held.